Okay, so the topic of participation is an interesting one. It's one that is approached on all levels and in varying degrees. That being said, narrowing down to getting students to respond and respond well to questioning, that formative assessment in class, it really seems like that should be a given, right? I mean, really, how hard can it be? Teachers know how to ask questions. We all know how to call on a student. So, what is the deal with this type of topic? How hard can it really be? What are your thoughts on that? Why is this topic so needed when it just seems very profound?
No, you're right. I mean, like if we were to play charades, that would probably be one of the actions that somebody would act out is teachers asking questions or calling on a student. The questions just kind of scream teacher, I guess. And really, I mean, questions have been around forever. If you think of it, they go all the way back to the very first chapters of the Bible when God asked questions of Adam of where was he? And God asked questions of Job, and then God asking questions of his disciples and others. And not because he didn't know what they were thinking. Obviously, he already knew that, but to help them understand their understanding and what they knew. And so questions, yeah, they've been around forever. We use them all the time. We use them, to gather information or to test a level of understanding, or even just to keep students alert and with us. And I was looking at a book called Checking for Understanding by Fisher and Frey. And they were talking about how ideally teachers check for understanding at least every 10 minutes. I would say on the first grade level, and with littles, it is way more than that. I was in a session last week at a conference, and they were talking about how even with smaller children, you're checking for understanding like 3 to 5 times per minute. And so that's just something that teachers do because it helps us when know whether we need to accelerate our instruction because our students already know what we're talking about or they're good on that, or whether we need to continue on that same topic and keep going because they don't understand it, or circle back to deepen their understanding. So really what we find out from questions guides our instructions, or at least it should guide our instruction. Sometimes I think we do it mindlessly as teachers. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, of what kind of questions you ask. Now, today we're talking about answers and how to get students to participate and answer. But really, it kind of starts with what kind of questions you ask. And of course, there's the 5 W's, the what, when, who, all those. And I do a lot of that in first grade because we're kind of at a lower level at first of understanding. But I hope you do go beyond that. And I hope our listeners today will think of that, even though we're talking about answers and getting students to answer and participate. I hope they'll think about the types of questions they ask. Are they using divergent questions, asking for how does this information connect to the old information that we learned yesterday and connect it with the new? Or how is this different from that? And always bringing back and interrupting their forgetting and bringing back that old information. Or probing questions. Why does this happen? Or what can you tell me more about this? Or clarifying questions. How did you get to that answer? Can you explain how you got there? Or give me an example of what you're learning. Even inventive questions. And that's just something that I've been trying to work on in my classroom, is taking what would normally be very low level learning and making it into more complex tasks and using complex questions to get my students to think. And I've been trying to use more inventive questions, asking them their advice. What would you say to this person in the story that we're reading about? Or what is one thing you would change? Causing them to invent and not just spit back information. And searching questions. Go find that in your book. Go prove that to me. And even hypothetical questions. In first grade, I think we live on these. If we were ever on an island, I think we could survive for a while on hypothetical questions. Well, what if the bus doesn't come? What if? Well, do teachers ever ask that? Maybe we should. What if this one thing were not in place? How would our world be different? Asking those hypothetical questions. But today, like I said, we're going to stick to more of the questions that would just want quick answers, but we'll do some with others. But one thing that our listeners have to really think about is that they have to be ready to embrace a classroom that is in motion, because a lot of these participation techniques are going to require a little bit more noise and action and excitement than just raising your hand. And so it might feel a little bit more like spilled rice than a tight hot dog when it comes to your classroom management, because they have to be ready to embrace that. And we know that movement is linked to learning. And so some of these participation techniques are going to be things that involve movement, because we know that that helps students to learn. And that total participation has to be a priority, first of all, as we get started today, because none of this is even going to matter if you're okay with just one student raising their hand. And I know there's a place for that, and we have to keep that in our classroom. There's no way to get rid of that completely, but you need to want everyone to participate. And I guess that's where we're coming in on the ground floor. That has to be our foundation when we think about questions.
Brought to you by BJU Press.